I think we can all agree that superhero movies are pretty big nowadays. I'm waiting for the next one to come out, but we'll just keep waiting patiently. But between Marvel and DC, we have enough movies, video games, and spin-off shows to keep us entertained for a long time. But not long enough. It's time, guys. Make the next movie. Come on. Have you ever noticed, though, with superhero movies that there's usually an origin story, their first movie showing just and explaining their backstory on how this person became a superhero? I think this is common because in order for us to understand who they are, we first have to understand where they came from. Now, did you know that the same is true for us? Just think about this. How many people in our schools or in our neighborhoods or on our teams do we assume we know? We might feel confident that we know the stories of some people just because we know some things about them, like their name or what they're good at or what they're into when it comes to clothes, music, or their friends. We think we may know the full picture of who a person is because of what we can see. The way they act, the way they live, who their friends are, and more, that tells us all we need to know, right? Well, not exactly. See, we can know a lot about a person, but not really know them. There is a really good chance there is more to the stories of the people around us than we see or know. Because here's what I know is true. Everybody has a backstory. And each and every person we think of, we know there's more to the story than we can see. And if we really want to know someone, we have to understand where they came from. We have to see more than just what's on the outside. We have to understand the people, their experiences, their beliefs, and more that make them who they are. Now, I think you probably know what I mean because you have a backstory. You know that in your own life, there's more to the story, and you want people around you to recognize that too. Maybe you got angry and yelled at your sibling this week, but you found yourself thinking, and she'd understand if she knew about the friend drama going on in my life right now. Or maybe you turned an assignment in late and thought my teacher would be more understanding if she knew that the power got shut off at our house this week. Maybe you stopped texting a friend back and thought, they have no idea how depressed I am. If they did, they'd know why I'm not responding. You see what I mean here? That stuff going on that you wish other people would consider, that's your backstory. It's what you're dealing with. It's where you're coming from right now. And if you're like me, you wish people would try to understand a little bit more of it from time to time. But I think the question for all of us is this. Do we give the same kind of grace and consideration to other people? I know I sometimes don't. The reality is we rarely consider the backstories of other people. We don't often stop to consider where they're coming from. And because of that, we don't ever really personally know them. So, how do you and I begin to see the backstory? How do we try to understand where people are coming from? How do we make it personal? Thankfully, Jesus gives us a great example to follow. Over the past couple weeks, we've been looking at a cool story from Jesus' life. A couple of thousands of years ago, he was traveling in ancient Israel and came across a town that was home to a well-known, bad guy. I know we talked about superheroes earlier, but this guy is more of a supervillain in his community. His name was Zacchaeus, and he was a tax collector, which basically meant he cheated his neighbors out of their money, just so that he could keep his wealth and status. Even though his reputation was pretty rough, when he heard Jesus was in town, Zacchaeus went out and tried to see him. He wanted to catch a glimpse of Jesus, so much that he climbed a tree just so he could see him from a spot above the crowd, because as we've said, he's a short little guy. What was crazy is that out of the entire crowd, Jesus noticed Zacchaeus up in the tree. And not only that, Jesus walked right over, called Zacchaeus by name, and told him to get out of that tree. He wanted to hang out with him. That's right. Jesus wanted to hang out with Zacchaeus, to spend time with him, to get to know him. And not just anywhere. Jesus wanted to go to Zacchaeus' home, the place he came from. Take a look at this. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down and at once welcomed him gladly. I realize Jesus inviting himself over to Zacchaeus' house may seem a little strange to us, but it would have been absolutely wild in this culture 2,000 years ago. Zacchaeus was not a good dude, and everyone knew that. Jesus knew it too. But Jesus wasn't satisfied with only knowing about Zacchaeus. He wanted to take a step towards going right to where he lived. He wanted to really get to know Zacchaeus. See, there's something about where we live that says a lot about who we are. Where we live is usually the place where we're most comfortable. It's the place where our guard comes down and when we can be who we really are. Can you imagine Jesus coming over to Zacchaeus' house and Zacchaeus just taking off his sandals, putting on his barbecue apron and kicking back with Jesus? Now, I'm sure that's not exactly how it went down, but one thing is clear. Jesus wanted to make it personal. Sure, he already knew everything about Zacchaeus, but he still decided to take a step into his world to get to know him. Jesus made it personal with Zacchaeus when he took a step to understanding where Zacchaeus lived. Visiting Zacchaeus' home meant that Jesus would get to know him in a very personal way. Jesus would get a glimpse into an important part of Zacchaeus' backstory. Of course, Jesus already knew his backstory because he's Jesus. I mean, come on. But that visit showed Zacchaeus that he was accepted, story and all. See, where we live isn't just a physical address. It's a place that gives others a glimpse into our personal circumstances, our situations, and our day-to-day lives. Where we live is a part of our backstory. It's the part most people don't typically get to see. And what's cool is that what Jesus did for Zacchaeus was an example of something that Jesus does for you and for me. While he may have walked into just one man's house that day, it gives us a small glimpse into the way God stepped into all of our lives when he chose to send his son Jesus to earth. The God who created the universe stepped into our world to understand where we come from, to show us how much he cares, to understand our stories in a real and personal way. It's personal because Jesus understands your story. He knows our stories because he knows where we live and what it's like to walk in our shoes. He doesn't just see and understand a little bit about us. He knows us because he knows our whole story, and he loves us no matter what. It's personal because Jesus understands your story. If the way we treat other people is going to be personal, then we have to choose to understand their stories, just like Jesus does for us. So where do we start? Well, before we get to know others, we might need to just become known ourselves. For some of us, our first step might to acknowledge the fact that Jesus wants to know you personally. In fact, he already knows you better than you know yourself. But you might need to invite him into your story. He wants to be a part of your life in a real and personal way. You can talk to your small group leader, a friend, somebody you trust about what it means to follow Jesus and experience life the way that he says is best for you. Then, it might be time for you to let somebody else into your story. Your step might be to share more of your story with someone else, someone you trust. Not just some random person or a stranger, but somebody who really cares about you. Somebody you trust who is already a big part of your life. You know, what if you started to share a little bit more about your story and where you come from? What if you told a little bit more about what life is really like for you? What if you opened up to share more about your backstory? It could be the step that helps this person know and care about you personally in a way that they couldn't before. Maybe you're in a place where you want to make it personal with others, the way Jesus did for you. You can do this by giving someone the gift of going second. In other words, you could be the first one to share. You can choose to share a little about yourself and your own backstory so that the other person knows it's safe to share some of theirs with you. When you share a little bit about what you're living with right now, it can give somebody else the courage to do the same. And when someone does share their story with you, make sure you choose to listen and ask questions to learn. When you show someone you care by listening and wanting to know more, you show them just how personal getting to know their story is for you. Just imagine if getting to know the stories of your classmates, teammates, and neighbors was something you took personally. I think you'd start to see people for who they really are instead of who you think they are. You become known as a person who really cares. A person who can be trusted, a person who wants to know people in a real and personal way. So remember, it's personal because Jesus understands your story. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you guys next time.